you don't know.
Okay.
All right. Hello, guys. If you just give us a second, we're going to give the Facebook algorithm to possibly start bringing folks in. Because you know what happens if I try and do it? They just go ahead and throw me in jail. The lovely Facebook jail that I don't want to see the cell of anymore. I have been out for almost a whole year now, and I'm kind of happy about that. Actually, it has been shorter than that, but I'm gonna keep it like that. Maybe they'll let me stay out. Let's see here. Mm-mm-mm. You kind of scared me there. I heard my voice like, "Hey, he
Yeah,
sounds like me." He
I
sounds
was
like me.
sorry. I opened the video to try to share it as well, and normally my phone is on silent when I do that, but that's how you heard it.
Hey, who's that? All right, so I got my two shares out. I'm at a three share minimum. So yeah, and we have maybe like about like three more minutes. Just give a little time here. And question before we jump into it, since we got like a little room, and it's
Absolutely.
about the show. I'm still gonna kind of ask you the same thing once it gets started, but so don't go in great detail. But did you come up with this after reading it, or after reading it you was like, like years and weeks later?
When you say this, do you mean the book or the
Yes,
presentation?
the book.
Oh, okay. I read the book the first time in 2004, and I didn't write True Speak until 2016 it was published. So
Okay,
I've had to review some of the content just to refresh some of the finer points. But no, the five love languages didn't inspire my book. It just they just work together.
gotcha. Okay. All right. I just gonna do right, Mister Facebook. Are you for real, man? It's like I've never in my life have seen a platform that just doesn't like me. It used to love me, Facebook. What's going on? Hey,
Oh no.
like, did you divorce me or something?
Oh,
Okay. So we're gonna go ahead and start because obviously Facebook's not gonna let me do what I wanted to do while I was waiting for those couple of minutes.
okay.
Guys, thank you for coming and having a lovely seat on the sofa. We have a special show tonight. I know you guys are used to us coming on at 9 o'clock, but I had the what is the words, like a joyful time with Miss Evelyn with her deep thought of the love language. And I just really wanted to give her another platform that she can go back over it again with you guys because I really feel like a lot of people know about the book, a lot of people know about the language, a lot of people kind of feel as though that they're doing it, but some of y'all are not doing it right. So I just thought maybe she can break it down a little bit more and we can get a little more detail about it. And so Miss Evelyn, could you please introduce yourself once again?
Hello, everyone. I am Evelyn Whitney, author of the book Truth Speak: Some Real Reasons Men and Women Don't Communicate. It has been my privilege to join you guys on the So For Real Talk on a number of occasions, and then to be invited back specifically for this love languages presentation. So if you have any questions, of course, it's always interactive. So please chat them in the comments, and then we'll try to address them as we go through. And at this point, I would like to share the screen so that we can begin the presentation.
All right.
So we have, of course, here this is the Five Love Languages is a book by Dr. Gary Chapman. And the presentation I am presenting to you from my reading of the book. One concept here we begin with is at the heart of love is the spirit of giving. Many people have heard what love languages are. So we're going to go through some introductory points very quickly. As adults in mature relationships, it's easy to equate love with sex. And a lot of people do that when they consider a love language. So they're thinking about it in terms of only how they deal with other adults. The truth is, children and teens have love languages too. And they also differ from child to child and from teenager to teenager, just like love languages differ from adult to adult. And if I had to guess, I would say that for children, the most prevalent love language would be words of affirmation. And that's because children are growing up. They need to experience their place in the world. They need to recognize where they are and to be continually affirmed in their value. Given the variety of experiences that adults have, it would be hard to quantify one that would apply to most adults the same way that words of affirmation would apply to a lot of children. But the whole premise is children and teens also have love languages. So it isn't just strictly dealing with adults. And one of the reasons that I moved through those points very quickly in the introduction is, truthfully, yes, children and teens do have love languages, but that's not what we're going to be talking about. We will be talking directly about adults and how adults can use their love language to communicate effectively their affections for the other person, and as well how to receive those efforts in communication. We do have to consider, though, this premise. Love cannot be demanded. Thus, with loving kindness have I drawn thee. That is a scripture from Jeremiah 31:3. As we begin, we would like to set some parameters for how the discussion will go. Throughout the talk, we're going to say primary love language, and in the presentation, it'll be abbreviated PLL, or just love language, LL. And then also, many love language talks explore what they are, and they show how to exhibit love languages in that way. However, there is not equal emphasis placed on the things to avoid. This particular talk will explore those points for an expose on the potency of having a love language and using it properly. So now with the first love language, words of affirmation. I say first simply because it's the first one written in the book. There is no necessary order of them that you have to learn this one before you learn that one, and you have to learn that one before you learn that one. They aren't successive in that way. It's just first in chronology as the book is written. So if love language is the one that, if words of affirmation speaks to you least, that's okay. If it speaks to you first, that's also fine. There really is no priority order in the love languages, except what your experience dictates is necessary for you.
So let me ask, not to interrupt, is it great to know all of them, or is that something that you will get into?
It is fantastic to know all of them, absolutely, because most people are able to receive love in all five of the languages. However, the primary love language is the one that speaks to them the most, the one through which you can communicate the most easily, the one that has the most effective response in the recipient's experience. That one is the primary love language. The other ones are important, but the primary love language is the one that has the most impact.
Okay.
So for words of affirmation, quickly we ask the question, what is it? It is using words to build someone up. If words of affirmation is that person's love language, there are some things that we want to emphasize. Encouraging words. You can do it. I support you. I'm in your corner. Kind words. You look good today. It's good to see you today. I'm glad you're here. Humble words. For this one, I need to present a question versus a demand. If there is an example of something that I need, humble words would be, it would really help me if you did A, B, C, and D for me, as opposed to, why haven't you done what I asked you? So humble words, we should emphasize if the person to whom we're speaking has a primary love language of words of affirmation. Honest compliments is a very important point. People think in general that women eat up compliments just because we just love being told that we're fantastic. No, women don't love compliments. They love genuine recognition for their effort. And that's the difference between an honest compliment and just some empty words that will ultimately show as empty, because all you do, you keep saying it and there's nothing else to it. If your compliments are honest, they will go very far for a woman whose primary love language is words of affirmation.
So with that being said, I'm glad that, and I had actually meant to ask you that last time. Um, that's why some of my compliments just go over the head, because that might not have been that person's love language. Because sometimes I compliment people and they be looking at me and they like, okay, and they going on about their business. I'm like, ooh, rude. Okay, but I was just trying to be nice.
I'm sorry about that. But as we're talking about one of the things that will make this talk different from the other ones, right now I'd like to focus on some things to avoid if the person to whom you're speaking has a PLL of words of affirmation. Avoid being critical. If a person's primary means of receiving love from another person is through words, if you are critical toward that person, you can break them down just as effectively as your kind words can build them up. And the things that we should avoid when we're dealing with love language speaks to the balance and the potency of the premise of a love language. It isn't just about the good things you do and the fuzzy feelings you want to get. It's about those things that you should avoid doing for the preservation of that person's knowledge of your affection for them. So if someone's love language is words of affirmation, or you're trying to speak to them in that way, avoid criticism. Another thing you should avoid is empty compliments that we were talking about earlier. It's just the idea that once you say them so often without the substance behind it, it becomes worthless. There is no value in it. And that is one of the things that I don't think people recognize about the plethora of comments that they want to shower women with. They feel like women just want to hear that they're fantastic and everything is perfect all the time. And no, that isn't what most women are looking for. Most women want to see that you recognize whatever their effort is. And when the compliment is honest, that is what comes through versus just empty compliments. You don't mean any of it. You're not even serious, probably. You're just saying all this because you think you're supposed to. The value of it's gone. You might as well be quiet.
Okay.
And that's how empty compliments work to destroy a person versus honest compliments can build them up if their love language primarily is words of affirmation. So we're seeing again that the potency of a love language is that it's just as effective in breaking someone down as it is to build them up. And that part isn't what people talk about mostly. All they focus on is what to do we're going to be looking at what to avoid so that we maximize the potential of knowing how to speak to someone's heart.
Okay.
Now, for the second love language is quality time. The definition by the book is undivided attention. For undivided attention, we emphasize a number of things. Togetherness, and that's specifically on page 64. We emphasize quality conversation and quality activities. Now, he went to a great length in the text to make sure that people understand that quality time is not just looking into the person's eyes, just sitting there looking at them, letting time pass with you staring at them. That isn't the premise of quality time. It's
Okay.
the undivided attention. You are with me, I am with you, and we are focusing on each other. Conversation can accomplish that quite easily because you're sharing, you're talking to that other person about what's going on with you, and you're receiving from that other person what's going on with them, and that creates that sense of togetherness through conversation. Quality activities achieve the same means when they do these things together, and that sense of togetherness is fortified. Now, here's one of the things that I had a question about: watching TV. Some people would consider watching TV together as a paradox to the undivided attention that quality time is, because undivided attention means that there is no TV. It means that there are no other people in the room. It means that there are no other distractions, and your focus is that person. So, how then does watching TV together become an active quality time activity?
So you trying to tell me us watching Loki this morning, it was not quality time? You just done hurt my feelings, boy.
I'm actually making the point exactly of what you just said. When people decide together that what they want to do is watch a certain TV show, it still bonds in that act of togetherness. And we've actually seen the opposite of that in TV and jokes. When one partner in the relationship has found that the other partner has run ahead and watched 2 or 3 episodes ahead
Ah.
where the other person is. So, yes, quality time can be accomplished when you're watching certain TV shows together. At the
Okay.
same time, that thin line should be careful not to be crossed, that the TV is becoming more of an object of your attention than the other person, when the point is to be together in the activity.
Okay.
So, for the quality time love language, the things that we should avoid: ignoring them, not paying attention, canceling too many dates, long
Ooh.
absences, things like that. For a person who receives love and attention through quality time, ignoring them is detrimental to how you can make them feel. Canceling too many times shows that your priorities are whatever you're canceling for rather than the individual that they are. And some people travel for work, so some absences can't be avoided, but extended long absences can really drain on a person whose love language is quality time.
So that with that one, you have some of these silly ideas that people text and you leave them on red for 4 or 5 minutes before you go back, or you don't text the first day and you let them wait 2 days before you text back because you don't want to seem desperate. Could you put that at long absences?
To be honest, no.
Oh, dang it.
The reason I wouldn't consider those long absences is the state of the relationship at that point. If
Okay.
people exchange phone numbers and exchange contact information and try to begin a relationship, they do follow all of these needless societal constraints about when you should call and what it means if you call too soon and what it means if you don't call soon enough. All of those societal rules do more to prevent people connecting than they really do to build the connection that these people are using these erroneous means to seek, which
Yeah.
makes it ridiculous to me that people still do those things, but they do. Nonetheless, hopefully in the beginning, they grow past those foolishnesses and into a structured relationship. Once the relationship is structured and that person's love language is quality time, now we're dealing with long absences being what can deteriorate their belief in your attention and affection for them. So we're looking at activity is a vehicle that creates that sense of togetherness. And this is the action with emphasis on the way that you are friends in a relationship that you draw from when times get difficult. That was actually the way that he verbalized this premise in the book. The things that you do together, the ways that you express your friendship with that person are easily conveyed through this quality time vehicle. And it's those things that you remember having done together, those memory bank experiences that you build on in the future. If you have some difficulty and you want to look back and say, this is where we are, this is how we got here, but before the problem arose, this was the condition of the relationship. So let's try and get back there so that we can see where we may have veered off. Quality time builds those events. Quality time builds that memory bank of those events from which you can draw and get the positive aspects of your relationship when there might be trouble in the future. So this is very important for many people who understand that you talk a lot about marrying your best friend. You talk a lot about having the friendship with your spouse and not just the marriage with them. And that friendship is normally demonstrated through these activities spent in quality time. The next love language we're talking about is receiving gifts. And receiving gifts are simply visual symbols of love. That's it. It's not complicated or even multifaceted. There's just a visual symbol of love. For a person whose primary love language is receiving gifts, we should emphasize a range of gifts. They don't always have to be bought. They don't always have to be made. You can find something that you know that person would be interested in. They could range from a hardtop convertible car all the way down to a flower that you picked on the way to see that person. It's just a visual symbol of your love for them. And one thing we have to consider is some people feel like trying to communicate love to someone is very difficult. It doesn't have to be when you approach it from the position of what they're looking for, as opposed to what you have to do and have it overwhelm you because you don't know. There are easy ways to find out, and presentations and information like this is one of the vehicles that people can use to determine their own love languages. So also for someone who's receiving gifts primary, the gift of self and the gift of presence. Essentially, if there's a difficulty or some type of thing that's going on, all you need to do is be there. You may not be able to come up with the million or $2 that would solve the problem monetarily, but if you're there with that person, they remember that. You may not have the ability to remedy whatever is going on, but if they know that you are with them, that is the gift of self, the gift of presence. And that is critical for people whose love language is receiving gifts. So one of the other things that we'd like to also avoid if someone's love language is receiving gifts, don't wait for special occasions. It doesn't have to be a birthday. It doesn't have to be a holiday. It doesn't have to be a work anniversary. Anytime, any reason, any day is the beauty of communicating love through a visual symbol to a person whose primary love language is receiving gifts. Another thing we want to avoid is focusing on the cost of the gift. If you give someone something very special, let's say it's a piece of jewelry, when you tell them, "Yeah, I bought you that jewelry because I wanted you to have it, but we could have paid our utility bill for a whole year with the money I spent on that,"
Uh,
you deplete the gift of any value that giving it was supposed to convey to the receiver, if price is their primary. So do not focus on the cost at all. That will obliterate the significance of the gift to that person.
whew.
So, Dr. Chapman says on page 77 that this is actually one of the easiest love languages. Make a list of the things your partner has spoken about receiving, or you can ask their family and friends, things that they might want. So, again, on the principle that love languages don't have to be difficult, sharing your affection for someone doesn't have to be difficult necessarily. This is one of the easiest love languages to learn because it isn't about you being overwhelmed with the enormity of what it could mean to show someone you love them. Ask what they want and deliver.
I think people just really make that harder than what it is, and it's really that easy.
Yes,
And I've learned that over years that it's just best to ask. Now, I do love a surprise, but
yes,
then that's why you ask prior to the surprise to
hmm,
figure out what you're going to surprise them with.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. And question on the receiving gifts: what is the difference between the gift of presence versus quality time as a love language? The difference in this is very simple: a crisis. When you are offering yourself in the gift of presence and the gift of self, it's because something traumatic has happened. A family member has fallen ill or has suffered an accident or some awful thing has happened that you are with that person in that moment to be with them. Quality time is a decision to focus on that person without a crisis. There is no reason for it other than the fact of just being there.
Okay.
So there are people who had a question about why isn't the gift of presence equal to quality time? And it's really not, because where the person is to receive your presence is a whole different thing. If there's a crisis going on, they're kind of focused on the crisis and getting that remedied, whatever it is, and they need your support in being there. Quality time is designed to prevent them from feeling like you are not for them, that you are not in their corner. It builds what you have with them versus a crisis situation implements what you have. So that's one of the ways that we could simply articulate the difference. Quality time builds what you have with them. The gift of presence calls upon and falls back on what you have with them.
Okay.
For the next love language, we'll be dealing with acts of service. Now, in his definition, an act of service is simply doing things you know that your partner wants you to do. When we talk about what to emphasize, doing what they ask you to do. We've had this conversation multiple times between men and women about why men and women have different priorities about when the trash should be taken out. The woman asks the man, "Will you take out the trash?" He doesn't for 3 or 4 days, and that becomes a problem between them. If you are if you are interacting with someone whose primary love language is acts of service, just do what they ask. That is simple. Just like you mentioned before, there are easy ways to communicate love to someone if their love language is acts of service. Do what they asked. And we also brought out the point in another seminar that some of the men hear what the women are asking about trash and they
Uh-huh.
don't think it's important. So they
Yes.
don't act on it because they don't think it's important. And many times that's the reason that it becomes such an issue between the two people because she has presented a need and he has not responded to that need, or his response is to ignore it. And to be frank, that is what the issue about the trash can is really boiling down to. That's what the issue really is about. It isn't just about the trash sitting there. It's about, I've asked you to do this particular thing and you've chosen not to do it. And this is how your choice not to do it is making me feel. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the trash can. It can be anything in which that train of circumstance in their feelings has been manifest.
Okay.
And so we also want to emphasize seeking opportunities. Just like you said with asking beforehand what the surprise could be, seeking an opportunity to do something that that person needs you to do is anticipating their need. If I am working and you've seen that the shoulder strap on my bag has broken 3 times and I've tied it in 3 knots to keep it together, you might decide to say, let me buy for you another bag. Anticipating that person's needs, seeking opportunity to do something for them that you know will lighten their burden load.
Okay.
We also want to talk about overcoming stereotypes. Now, how is overcoming stereotypes considered an act of service? When I first read that, that's what Dr. Chapman said. I asked myself that question, but he further explains it. In this act of service, the premise is simply allowing the person you're speaking to be who they are. That it's that simple. When you have unconscious biases and stereotypes and you assert and impose them onto the other person, you begin to expect things that they may not be trying to communicate to you because of the stereotypes that you have in your mind about that person. You know, like all athletes spend 55 hours at the gym. So I'm not even going to ask him to come and spend time with me because I know he's going to say no. Don't make those assertions.
Hmm.
Overcome your own biases and your own stereotypes to let them be who they are and
I
talk
can
to
see
them
that.
about what they need.
I, I can see that as being an issue because I've done it a couple of times where instead of asking or doing that she may be tired right now, so I'm not gonna. But she may want that and need that, and regardless of her being tired, that might have made things a little better. And so I'm having to work on that part.
There's a little bit of a difference in what you're offering and the presented notion here. You are definitely open to ask a person and consider where they are and what they need. Absolutely. But we're talking about assuming what that need will be based on a stereotype that they haven't necessarily done anything to support.
Okay.
Let's go with something easy to attack. Women and our supposed infectious love for shoes. If a guy comes to me and says, yeah, we've been spending time together. Sure, I like you. I hope you like me. But I am going to take it upon myself to build you a 7 foot shoe storage cabinet when I have 4 pairs of heels, gym shoes, and flips. He's assumed that as a woman, shoes are my fuel, and he's acting on that assumption. So, what he does for me is based more on his assumptions rather than his effort to actually see what I need. And
Gotcha.
overcoming those stereotypes that Dr. Chapman classifies as an act of service because it allows you, the person with whom you're interacting, to be who they are and not having imposed upon them things they should or should not do based on stereotypes.
Huh.
The next thing that we'll emphasize for someone whose love language is acts of service, doing in the marriage practices that were established in courtship. We hear thousands of times over that when people were dating and when they were courting, before they got married, he would come over all the time with his truck polished, and he would bring flowers, and he would bring anything that he thought that my family members would need. He was on his A game all the time during the courtship. When we got married, he stopped all that.
Mm.
He'll say something like, she used to wear these fantastic dresses all the time, and now I can't get her out of sweatpants to save my life. You know, she used to do all these fantastic things while we were in the relationship, but as soon as we got married, she stopped. He has qualified continuing to do those things in the dating relationship, in the marriage, as acts of service to your partner. So
But we
that
should though.
absolutely, absolutely. And that way we maintain those things that they enjoyed about the relationship. You maintain those things that they found value in the relationship regarding. And again, I tried to give examples that go both ways. You know, the men have things they complain about, and the women have things that they complain about also. But the continuance of those things that built the foundation of your relationship are considered acts of service. That you do these things when you're involved, and you keep doing them once you get married. Those are considered acts of service. A few things actually that we want to avoid: trying to force people to do things. The quote at the top shows that love cannot be demanded. When you try to force somebody to do something, even if they capitulate, they're not doing it because they love you. They're
I was
doing
just
it
going to
because
say.
they want you to be quiet. They're
Yep.
doing it because they're tired of hearing you complain about it. Those two emotions have nothing to do with love. They allow annoyance and grievances to fester. So if someone's love language is acts of service, trying to force them to do something is going to work against the notion that you're trying to build in your connection to them. This one, allowing someone to use you.
Mm.
Fortunately, I've seen this more often in women than men. Men can do it. I know that you and I have talked about that. But there are women who say, I know this man is broken. I know that he screams at me because he has all these traumatic past issues. I know that he takes my money because he's trying to find a job and he can't find one right now. So when she's submitting to those things, yes, I said that on purpose,
Ah.
in allowing herself to be used for the supposed betterment of that other person, that is not the true meaning of an act of service. She is, I'm going to say this very firmly, and it's true. She is wrong if she
It's
believes that
you're hindering that person.
would be an act of service. Exactly right. She is enabling, and
Enabling, that's the word I'm looking for.
that enablement becomes the hindrance that you said a moment ago, because they're not going to be motivated to change anything if they know that she won't make them, or that they won't have to, because they will be enabled in those bad vices. So allowing someone to use you as you claim that this is how you show them love, that is not an act of service, and we should avoid that at all cost. On the front side of what we emphasize, doing what is asked, is the counterpart needing to be asked something 62 times. If acts of service is someone's love language, to have them need to ask you repeatedly to do what they've asked speaks against your affection for them. That's not going to communicate love for them. And that's going to create the same problem in acts of service that ignoring them creates for quality time, that focusing on money creates for acts of for receiving gifts. I mean, so you have these things that you have to avoid when you're trying to convey your love to someone in these particular ways. If you do those things that you should avoid, if you do those things that you should avoid, you do not communicate love. You communicate rejection. And that's the importance of understanding the balance of what you should do with certain love languages and what you should avoid, because it is a blending together of those two notions. Blaming someone is another thing that you should avoid, because that can usually go both. You can go around and around with blame. I did this because you did that. Well, I did that because you did this and so other. I did this and so other because you did that there and the next. That will continue. And acts of service is as an expression of a love language will be obliterated if you constantly blame the other person. Here's the one that I think people had some kind of questions about. Infidelity. How is infidelity an act of service? Well, let me show you. Many men believe that you can have sex without emotional attachments, and they cultivate being better than women at it just because that's how society
Act of service.
has projected notion. But what he is able to or is unable to makes no difference. He should avoid infidelity because he knows she would be hurt. That's how being loyal to someone is an act of service. And in that facet, it doesn't matter if you could do otherwise. You are choosing not to because you know how that other person will be affected. So as we further consider that notion, we expand what an act of service in love actually means. It's not only doing things that you know they want, it's not doing those things you know they don't want you to do. And the balance of those premises comprise acts of service as a primary love language.
Everybody should be doing an act of service in a relationship.
Absolutely. 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 And our final love language for tonight is physical touch. What is this exactly? By his definition in the book, all it is physical contact in loving ways. For the person whose primary love language is physical touch, there's some easy things to emphasize: hugs, holding hands. If someone's primary love language is physical touch, there is nothing more important than holding them when they cry. That you need to physically be there in that moment with them. Now, of course, when we talk about touch, foreplay and sex as appropriate become part of the discussion. But I share with you, as I've shared before with multiple people, if one more guy tells me that he is emotionally available and in touch with his feelings by exhibiting that he knows that his love language is physical touch, just as an excuse to run straight to sex, I'm gonna scream.
You know, I've never heard that, so that's my first time ever hearing it.
I heard it all the time, hear it a lot still. It is unfortunate and startling how far people will go to abuse and manipulate someone emotionally. The idea that Women are stereotypically emotional creatures. We're exploited for having these nurturing sides, and we want to connect with a man who can meet us in those emotional spaces. All of those notions, some men exploit when they try to present themselves as emotionally in tuned enough to know what their primary love language is. And then to have that love language be touch just as an excuse to run the sex
Hmm.
is so, it's just, it's deplorable to me, to be honest with you. I don't know how many millions of women have fell for it, especially when this book first came out. Oh my goodness. But just as a simple point, no, guys, listen, please. You can't just tell a woman that your primary love language is physical touch and expect her to want to have sex with you every time you get ready under every possible condition that you can imagine. There are boundaries that need to be exercised when you're dealing with any of these love languages, which is exactly the point that we're talking about, the things that you should do and the things that you shouldn't. So while we're talking about the things to avoid when someone's primary love language is physical touch, isolation and distance are very difficult for people whose physical touch is their primary love language. Crossing boundaries
Hmm.
is detrimental. If your love language is physical touch and you express to somebody that you don't want to be touched in a certain way and they do it anyway, that is going to communicate rejection just as thoroughly as a hug will communicate support if they're crying. The potency of having someone's love language at your fingertips isn't just about the frilly things that you do that feel good all the time. It's about knowing what not to do so that you maximize the value of that knowledge of what they need.
So what you're saying that, do you think the not doing can become more important as the doing?
They are absolutely equal. Absolutely.
Okay.
They work in complete tandem with each other. And that is the emphasis. That is what I want to be taken away from everything that we're talking about, everything that we're sharing about. It's almost like the way that certain love language conversations have been presented, all you focus on is the right foot, the right foot, the right foot, the right foot. But your body moves as a whole in the partnership of the left and right foot, the left and right feet. So you have to have those positive aspects of what you do emphasize, as well as knowing what to avoid so that your progress forward will be consistent, so that you can walk, as it were, into a deeper connection with that person. On the point of infidelity or
Hmm.
avoiding infidelity being an act of service, Dr. Chapman says, yeah, he says exactly that you should avoid adultery if your person's primary love language is physical touch. The reason that he gives is the presentation of their need, if you will. If I am someone who has physical touch as a primary love language and my partner cheats on me, what I'm seeing isn't just that he's rejecting me, but he's choosing someone else. And he's taking those things that were sentimental to us and between us in our relationship, giving that to someone else.
Ah.
These types of things are the reason that many relationships don't come back from adultery, and they don't come back from infidelity in general. In my mind, the only difference between infidelity and adultery is the state of the relationship when it happens. If you are married, sex outside the marriage is adultery. If you
Mhm.
are in a relationship, sex outside the relationship is infidelity. It's the same thing, it's just a different name for it. And I just stress that to make the point that I'm not making a substantive difference between the two by using different verbiage. It's just the state of the relationship at the time that the disloyalty occurs.
Okay.
Violence is another thing that you should avoid. And it speaks to the same reason of the potency of being able to speak to someone in a way that their heart will receive, that will lift them up, but that same vehicle by which they can be elevated can be used to bring them down. And violence is definitely something that you could break a person with if they're, I mean, well, sure, if they're physical, if their primary love language is physical touch, but
Yeah.
that can happen anyway. You don't have to have physical touch as your primary love language to be broken down by violence. But specifically, is it potent to erode a person's sense of self-worth if love is received by them through touch? A few points that he brought out that I also want to capitalize upon. We touched on one of them here already. Touching in ways that are uncomfortable communicate hate, not love. I've been using the word rejection as the counter to acceptance and uplifting in love language, but he actually says it can communicate hate. It's saying that you are insensitive and that you don't care about what they actually need. You're more interested in doing what you want because that's good to you versus what they want and how you can express yourselves in love together in this moment.
Mm.
Point two, he also says, even if you and your spouse have the same primary love language, here is his quote exactly: don't make the mistake of believing that the touch that brings you pleasure will also bring pleasure to her.
Oh, let me hit you that right there. That not being able to have that conversation during sex is like the biggest issue in some relationships. And my thing is, and I'm gonna say this: don't maul me down, women. A lot of women, and I'm gonna go to men too, but first, a lot of women feel that a man should, regardless if he sit up here and say that he's the best thing in bed, he should automatically know how to please you. And if he don't know anything about you, you can't sit up here and say a man is whack. And even vice versa, like a man that doesn't know himself and or you guys don't talk about, hey, unfortunately, what we did last night, it really was good and it went left instead of going right.
Yeah, that absolutely happens. And one of the difficulties that I found that serves as the foundation, as the strongest reason that those conversations can't maturely take place, people are getting into sex before they learn how to talk to the person.
Ding, 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 ding.
We can't have a dialogue about anything serious. If we can't have a dialogue about anything serious, we
Yeah,
don't know each other well enough to be engaging in sexual activity.
yeah,
And people don't get that. They want to meet on these social media sites and all these apps and all these other things. And the ironic problem with wanting to do that is that they're looking for connection and they've attached sex to that connection, but
yeah.
it's all vanity. It's not going to work because their premise is wrong when they're even moving forward in those ways. It's
Hmm.
almost, I'm going to say this, it's almost as silly as eating an air sandwich expecting yourself to really be full.
I like that. That one was good. Cause them air sandwiches, they're very tasty at times.
Another problem that some people have when they're trying to have those intimate conversations about what pleases one person won't necessarily please the other. You spoke to a point that guys are, depending on what the woman believes, some guys are expected to have this sexual prowess that will command that whatever he does is satisfying. The problem with believing that is that it's dead wrong. There are
Yep.
some things that you can consider biologically. At the same time, not everybody's biological stance is intact the same way. Perfect case on this point. People know what tomatoes are. Everybody has seen a tomato. Everybody's probably had a couple in their lives, may have even
Yep.
had a few today. So a nutritionist can come and tell you that tomatoes are nutritious, tomatoes are healthy, you should eat tomatoes because you will benefit from eating tomatoes. That won't help me one bit if I'm allergic to them.
Exactly.
So here this guy is coming to this woman in this instance of intimacy, and he's expecting to function as that dietitian, as that nutritionist. I know this and I know that. Her experience dictates
Yeah.
what is satisfying to her knowledge of. Not that knowledge doesn't help, but what's prioritized in those intimate moments is the conversation that the two people need to have about what pleases her, what pleases him, and how we can make this an experience that not only do we enjoy together, but that we look forward to as something that we can share. Those things are completely lost when people get into having sex before they know a person well enough to have these types of deep conversations. And I don't know how to get people back to the place where you actually know more than the person's Twitter handle before you're
Yeah.
obsessed together.
You
I'm
know,
hoping for that, but we'll see.
to add to that, something that I've thrown out to a lot of people, especially when they talk about numbers or how many partners. I'm like, a person that maybe had five partners versus a person that's only had that one person for, let's say, 20 some years,
Mm.
um, can still, and I'm using a car reference, can still have more miles than a person who has miles of experience than a person with five people, which goes to what you were just stating. So that experience level is higher. And so just because this person said, okay, I did something with five people versus that person that's been with that one person, they could have done a plethora of things that has, when you come in, which men think they are just all rulers when it comes to the bed situation. Um, and you not having that conversation after, you just go to sleep and just think that you just killed it, and you leave the house, and now she going to talk to her girlfriends. The girl, that thing was whack.
Oh my God. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Absolutely agree with that. And I know that there are a lot of women who are not going to like what I'm going to say. I don't mind that. For me personally, it makes no sense for women to fake satisfaction.
Hmm.
If they are not being satisfied, they should say that. Now, of course,
What?
I if they are not being satisfied, they should say that. It doesn't have to be that she tells him how inept he is in front of all his friends and cursed the day his mother was born. I'm not saying it has to be disrespectful, but it goes to the point of having the conversations about what pleases him, what pleases her, and how they can come together in this experience. Because women will do that all the time. They act
Yeah.
like the men have done all of these magnificent things, and they lie to him about how thoroughly satisfying he was. And then they go to their girlfriends and they talk about, oh, I'm trying to keep this PG right now. Uh,
It is not
they talk
PG. Don't
about
worry about
they talk about lacking in size. They talk about lacking in stamina. They talk about all of these ways that he has lacked and how unsatisfied she was with the whole encounter. My question to her became, if you drove your car through a car wash and it came out with more mud on it than it had when you drove in, would you not talk to the people at the car wash to either get your money back or figure out what happened, that you did not have the experience that you expected with this person?
But you want to know what some of them still do? They'll take their butt right back around in that same car wash and go again, go again.
I need for my ladies to stop sacrificing yourself on the altar of his pride. Stop behaving as if when you tell him where he is lacking, he's automatically going to blow up and leave you lonely. You don't want to be lonely. You don't want to be sad. You don't want to be alone. So you just absorb the dissatisfaction that he's bringing to the relationship. Given how involved you are with this particular action, there should not be that much of a sacrifice. That I stand on. And there are, again, women who will disagree with that point. But the premise is always you need to be able to talk to your person, talk to your spouse about what satisfies him, talk to your spouse about what satisfies her. And while I'm jumping on women for faking satisfaction, men, you have to understand something also. You don't really know everything as well as you think you know it. If a woman is trying to tell you what is pleasing to her, listen, that's not hard. It's not difficult. It's not rocket science. Don't feel like she's attacking you just because you're trying to have a conversation about what will be pleasing to both people. If you ask her what she wants for lunch and she tells you she doesn't know 62 times, you're comfortable with that. But if she tells you this is something specific that you could do, why is it a problem all of a sudden?
Well, I do have a problem with the 62 timer with not knowing what you want to eat, but but it just goes, that situation just goes back to that I'm a man and a woman don't know what she's talking about, basically. That's what that is. That's all that is.
Yes, and that attitude needs to be demolished if you ever expect to have a healthy relationship with someone. Just absolutely just thrown out. And there are other instances that a guy will take what a woman says, even if it's not completely formed, and say, "Okay, this is what she thinks." And that's fine for him to do that on those other things, but when it gets over to sex, there's no wiggle room. There's no allowance for her to be able to speak to what she needs. And he needs an attitude adjustment about that.
Yeah.
Point blank. The same way that women need to stop faking it, men need to stop thinking that they know everything. And with those two walls dismantled, you will be able to have a conversation about what will be pleasing for both people. And that was what we were talking about from page 106, where he said specifically, don't make the mistake of believing that the touch that brings you pleasure will also bring pleasure to her. The other point on this physical touch as a primary love language, in crises, good touches last long after the embrace. Lacking or absence hurts just the same. They remember you weren't there. Those speak to the other premises that we were talking about, the gift of presence, the holding them when they cry, things of that sort. That statement right there is another nutshell of everything that we're trying to encompass in this entire discussion. The good things that you do have potency for building. The good things that you don't do have the same potency for destruction. That is potency of a love language. It isn't just about the good, fluffy things that people also always talk about. It's about knowing those things not to do and avoiding those things that communicate rejection, when your purpose in knowing a love language is to communicate love.
Okay.
And as a number of closing premises, we're moving on to the idea that there's some concepts here that we can elaborate on just a little bit further as we close. And can you all still see me here?
Yes.
Okay. Concept number one, the value of knowing your primary love language is just the beginning of how powerful a love language really can be toward an effective and functional relationship. Oftentimes, that's just where people stop, but it's really just the beginning. Concept number two, boundaries need to be set around the way that primary love languages are spoken. And that's the easiest one that we can talk to is about the physical touch aspect. When a person tells you, do not touch me that way, that boundary needs to be respected in order for there to be a cohesive love exchange and interaction between those two people.
Okay. So your things are not coming up, but we still hear you. So you can keep going.
Okay. The third and central point that we've been discussing, you can cause grave injury to your spouse using their primary love language. I don't think people recognize that because love languages are always construed in such positive lights that people don't recognize there is an inherent danger just the same. You can do things that make them feel loved, and you can do things that make them feel rejected based on that same love language. And that's the point where we're coming and bringing all of these points together.
Okay.
And the last concept on this one, this is where the work needs to be done when we're talking about a relationship. Because sometimes, if I know that my spouse has words of affirmation as his primary love language, and I have had the worst day ever,
Aaron's
I
Facebook.
I don't feel like doing things that I know will enable his growth, even in that emotional moment. I have to come apart from what I would be feeling and what I would prefer in that moment to do what I know he needs. The same way it works if a man knows his lady's love language. There are times that he might be frustrated with her and he doesn't want to do the things that he knows would build her up. And it's hard to put a muzzle on our own self and our own feelings in order to build someone else. That's where the work of love languages comes in as far as a relationship is concerned. We looked at Dr. Chapman saying that receiving gifts was the easiest love language to learn, but we've actually talked about some easy ways that a lot of these love languages can be implemented. It's just a matter of us choosing to do that for that other person when we may not necessarily want to in that moment. But we make that choice to share that love because we know that that's what they need and that's how they'll receive it. And people will have to grapple with deciding not to withhold those activities when they don't feel like it, so that in the sharing, it will benefit the other person. And I have a graphic that I've devised for trying to illustrate these concepts. This graphic is not in the book. I have to just put that disclaimer out there. It is completely devised based on my understanding of the concepts. So here's the graphic. It shows you a step-by-step process to the outcomes that we've been discussing.
Okay. Just a little lag.
Okay.
So
If you okay, if you know the person's primary love language and you emphasize the person's primary love language, the notion that you express will be love. That sounds enough, and indeed it is. But because emotions are usually given this abstract presentation, people feel like they're a lot more complicated than they really are. But there are situations that emotions are very simple, and oversimplification is not always a bad thing when we're dealing with certain premises. So if we know their primary love language and we emphasize their primary love language, the notion that we express to them will be love. If we know their primary love language, but we ignore that primary love language and we do all of those things that we're supposed to avoid, the notion expressed will be rejection.
huh.
And these two notions together comprise the value and the potency of knowing what someone's love language is. It isn't just about the positive, frilly things that we always structure love language conversations around. It's about doing those things. It's about not doing those things that would convey rejection in the same framework of that person's love language.
Okay. So a question that may help people understand love language. Now, example, and I'm trying to make this quick so we can wrap it up. Let's sit up here and say that it states that my love language is act of service. Now, does that mean
Mhm.
that's what I do for my partner, or that's what I want to be done to me, or both?
I love that question. I love that question, and I'm so glad that you asked it. When a person determines that their primary love language is whichever one it is, but acts of service for the example, if a person's primary love language is acts of service, that is the way that love is best communicated to them.
Okay.
That is the way that they receive the highest concentration, emotional understanding of someone else's affection for them.
Okay.
Again, we started with the idea that love language, all people can receive love through any of these ways, but there are ways that are more potent for some people than for others. And that's where we devised the language, the primary love language versus love languages in general. But then we also have the question of even if acts of service is the primary way by which you receive love, that does not mean that your partner has the same primary love language. So, whatever the partner's primary love language is the love language that you as an individual need to speak to communicate love to that person. Dare I say, especially if it's different than yours? Because a lot of people feel like if I receive love the most through acts of service, then that's the same way that I want to show love because I know what works for me, so it should work for everybody. No, that isn't how love languages work. That isn't how most things work.
And the reason why I asked that, and the reason why I threw that one out there, because that regardless of how many times I take this freaking test, that's what it says, right? But service for me, it doesn't it doesn't matter, but I do it well. So now you don't confuse me. I'm like, act of service towards me does not. I'm not going to say it does nothing for me, but
Uh-huh.
it's not a sense of if I don't get it, I'm bummed out. But I feel the need to have to do it though.
Okay. Well, here's where I would address some part of your question. Number one, many of those online tests are, um, for lack of a better word, structured to pigeonhole.
Well, now this is off the book.
Okay.
Yeah, this is like off the book. No other love language test. This is off the book, period, and off the book's website is.
So let me clarify that last thing I said for anybody who has a question about it, and then I'll get back to what you're saying right now. When I say they're structured to pigeonhole, what I mean is they give the online tests give certain questions and answers that if you answer a certain way, that's going to project a certain outcome. So
Mhm.
even if you aren't necessarily feeling the way that these answers are structured to box you into, you'll end up with an answer that may not be where you really are in terms of your emotional experience. But the way that some of them are structured will just take you down the path that they believe your best outcome would be based on the objective answers that you give. So that's what I mean by being structured to pigeonhole. That doesn't mean that those things are directly pertaining to you, because as most people experience, they're not. And those are really for entertainment anyway, to
Yeah.
give you some idea of how to couch certain questions that you would need to ask yourself. So I don't want to confuse anybody when I say that. But back to your statement specifically, when you said that you've read the book and you have felt like you would be misdiagnosed as what your primary love language would be based on the content, what do you think is the biggest discrepancy? What do you think that they've projected for you that should be right that it's not? Is it just active service?
Well, no, but it's accurate. But I'm just what what got me to that it is what it is. But I don't receive it like that. But I do it, and I love doing it.
So, in other words, you're saying that active service is the love language that is the easiest for you to speak.
Yes.
That's another something that people should be aware of as well when we're talking about love languages. What you receive love through and what you express it through. Those can be different as well. So what do you have, do you feel like it's too personal a question for me to ask what
I'm an
you,
open book.
okay, what do you believe your primary receiving love language is?
Touch,
Okay.
but
So
it's like the lowest number on my thing.
one of the things that I know that for me personally, when I was looking through the value of these love languages and how each of them manifest for me, one of the caveats I found was with receiving gifts. I love to receive gifts, but for me, the gift needs to be practical. I'm
Okay.
not one that you're going to give me 1,000 teddy bears and I'm going to love each of the 1,000 teddy bears and try to redress them and put clothes on them and things of that sort, like some people do in the receiving gifts as a primary. That isn't my shtick. However, I recognize that in receiving love through receiving gifts, that caveat has to be there. It has to be practical. It has to be something that you've seen me have a legitimate need for that you actually give me because you're thinking about it. Not because you want me to shovel the driveway, do you give me a shovel? That
Yeah.
isn't the thing I'm talking about. Like the example that I gave about my shoulder strap. If you've seen that it's breaking and it's about to fall apart and you buy me another one or you sew that one and repair it, that's the caveat on the receiving gifts love language for me. And I said that to say this. You said that the way that you've read the material feels like physical touch would be rated as your lowest love language, but you feel it's your primary one.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
but I think you just answered my question and why it doesn't affect me the way that it should.
Okay, wait, whoa. What are you determining it should do?
Well, act of service, if that's my love language, the act of the act of service, the caveat, like you were just saying,
Mhm.
uh, if it's done correctly, you feel that love. But I just realized, just running through my life, prior to this relationship, um, all the active services were just in order for me to be used, and so it gave me a bad active service towards myself was like a bad taste in my mouth. Not saying I don't take anything that's done for me in this relationship and just throw it out the window, because I appreciate it and I do tell her that, and I love when it's done too. But it's like it's been foreshadowed by that bad taste in my mouth. I just like noticed and realized that.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
more than likely where that's coming from. And yeah,
Okay. Okay. I receive that absolutely. And I think that it is very, that's one of those conversations that everybody has to have with themselves when they're dealing with love languages. How they work, how they flow, how they apply, and sometimes how they don't. And if they apply, are there any caveats? These deep conversations don't happen in 140 characters. And that goes
yeah,
back to what we were talking about before, that people need to have stronger connections to each other in conversation before this level of intimacy becomes introduced into their interaction, especially if they're going to be talking about, involving with each other in sex, because that carries so many complications, potential children, exes, relationships, all of that type of thing. But
yeah.
but for what I'm saying in this moment, the substance of what you just shared is a very, very potent point about how when you're reading these love languages, you do have to assess their value in your experience and what you may have experienced that could shift the paradigm just a little bit. I'm going to go on what I'm calling a creative license for this next statement right here and say, just like with the tomato, the nutritionist says that tomatoes are nutritious, they're tasty, and they're all those great things. But what happens to the person who's allergic to tomatoes? None of that has the value that it's prescribed to have. So that we do have to keep in mind, specifically with all of the love languages, though we were talking about it as it pertains just to physical touch.
Okay.
Um, Normally, there are questions that usually float up, and we try to address some of them. If
Yeah.
there are any questions, I can try to address those now. But as we're closing, I just want to say that I don't want to present the I don't want to present knowing someone's love language as a burden, because it's not. It's
No, it's not.
really one of the ways that you can get directly to the heart of someone, quite literally, for good and for bad, yes. But if you think about it, how blissful would it be if the person that you're in a relationship with had for a primary love language the language that's the easiest for you to speak?
Hmm.
The potency of a love language is that it enables you to communicate love and to receive love in ways that are maximized to your personhood. And when you're having these conversations and you're recognizing the values of each language in your experience, that is where you and that person can grow together, because you're learning and you're knowing what encourages them, what enables them, what builds them up, at the same time as you know what can break them down. So that becomes your responsibility to care for the heart and for the emotions that they've entrusted to you.
I like that. I like that. So, Miss Evelyn, how can we find you?
Yes, wonderful. It is always a pleasure to come to So For Real Talk. I am available via Facebook, Evelyn Whitney Books, Instagram and Twitter, Whitney Books, on YouTube at Evelyn Whitney. And if you have any questions or workshops, Evelyn Whitney Books at gmail.com. To purchase a copy of my book, it's available at evelynwhitney.com.
Hey, next book plan, and we just started chapter second, chapter second, the second chapter, and yeah, I really needed to start reading this to actually help me with the sofa. Really, it's actually opening dialogue with me and Lisa as well. Um, but I'm a true believer. Things happen for a reason, so that book
Absolutely.
landed in my lap just when I needed it. So, guys, you can find us on the Sofa Real Talk. Also, we've started a Instagram and a TikTok where we do some of our sofa lives and videos and posts under Mr. and Mrs. Take Over the World, and it is AND, not the just the letter N or the little crazy mark. Mr. and Mrs. Take Over the World, TikTok and Instagram. So by all means, please follow us because we do our podcast on those two platforms every Saturday night, and our podcast airs on all available podcast platforms on Wednesday morning. Makes me just think about the fact that I did not schedule the one that we did Saturday to today. So as soon as I get off here, I need to go ahead and post that right there. So I do apologize, guys. But again, we do appreciate it. There are some gems that was in here that has popped up in my head. I'm going to make some titles for. So definitely that's what I'm doing this week. I'm gonna try and get a week's load of titles available. So if anyone would love to come on, by all means, we would love for you to come up on the sofa and have a deep conversation. So with that being said, we do love you guys and you have a great